The whole stylistic trend of minimalism of house decor, for instance, is an incipiency of valuing less of the presence or valuing the absence of things in the room space. So people like the idea that the absence of material things leads to some kind of fullness of experience. In your world, what does that mean to say that something is present? What does that mean to be something is absent? In our everyday life, do we perhaps tend to get caught up by valuing only the presence on one hand, and yet ignoring the value of the absence on the other hand? I guess this tendency is partially attributed to a widely shared belief, which is to say, more is always better, but less is always bad. But is this really the case? The parable, for instance, in the Lotus Sutra, chapter 16, seems to challenge this kind of ordinary conception of presence and absence, and then opens up an insight that gets our ways of thinking out of the box. It seems to suggest what is even better is not merely the presence of something, but rather it is a free, unlimited access to both presence and absence, and thereby to let us use both of them whenever it is appropriate. That's how the Lotus Sutra helps us to overcome the provisional distinction between the presence and absence of things, and what is near and what is far, what is already here and what is only there in our everyday life, and help us become a Buddha. So, what does that all imply? Let's discuss today.
Lotus Sutra practice for mindful life.
If you are not familiar with the parable, please click the link below, Living the Lotus, a monthly magazine published by the International Engaged Buddhist Movement called kosei-kai, and review the story. They have nice illustrations and are very well written. But today, we will use this book, Brooke Ziporin's Emptiness and Omnipresence, an essential introduction to Tiantai Buddhism. So we will first take a look at his summary of this parable called A Skillful Physician and the Deranged Children, and then visit his commentary that is based on Chinese Tiantai school of Buddhism. Here's what he writes on page 110 to 11. First, a summary. A doctor goes on a trip. While he's away, his children get into his medicines and recklessly ingest them at random. When the father returns, he finds his children violently ill, frothing at the mouth, inebriated, out of their minds. He sees what the medicines they took and immediately prepares the antidote. But the children are too far confused to even heed his instruction to ingest the antidote. He cannot catch them and force it down. They keep spitting it up, running about wildly. So he devises a skillful means. He departs, leaving the antidote and instructions to take it, telling them he's off on another business trip. Then he sends back word to them, announcing to the children that their father has died on the road. The news of their father's death shocks the children back to their senses. All they have left of him is the antidote and his instructions to take it. In their desperation and grief, they finally do so. Once they are restored to health, the father returns, telling them that he had never really died. And this summary is followed by Dr. Ziporin's commentary, based on Tiantai, Chinese school of Buddhism. So it is with the Buddha's nirvana, his extinction, his departure from this world. The Buddha's absence itself is another of his skillful means of teaching. The removal of the beloved father, the sudden bereftness of care and protection, and the subsequent longing for the father produces an enhanced attention to the father as he was in the past, made more present by his absence. His absence is a mode of his presence, his effectiveness in the world, his being here with his children. He is more there for them when he is not there. For being there to someone, being present to them, really just means the power to have an effect on them, and it is his absence that makes them search for him, long for him, and in this way become intensely focused on him, feeling his effect them much more deeply. In fact, both being there and not being there are alternate modes of being there, of doing the Buddha's work in the world. For really, as the Buddha says, nothing is either simply there or not there, either present or absent, either thus or otherwise. It is both, it is neither. Being there is a way of being gone is a way of being there. It is the alternation, the interaction, the skillful deployment of presence and absence that is the true presence. Here the Lotus Sutra offers us yet another new middle way between being and non-being, between presence and absence. There seems to be a lot to unpack in this essay. What are your thoughts on Brooks Point's Tiantai take of this Lotus Sutra parable from chapter 16? I found it his excellent Tiantai move to say that the absence of something has a heavy influence on the minds of people. I mean, in this case, the minds of children. When the father, someone whom they love, is missed due to his death, their minds are intensely focused on the father, occupying the entire field of their minds. It is precisely this intense moment of experiencing the father's presence that is felt precisely because of the absence of the father, which made them take the medicine and stand up to move on eventually. So this is an application of Tiantai middle way to this Lotus Sutra story. Before thinking about how this insight can be powerfully and creatively useful to our everyday life experience, let's come up with some examples that prove the power of absence in our ordinary situations. So for instance, like in our everyday life, we tend to think more about, focus on, and value the presence of something. In contrast, the absence tends to be considered something less of the value, as we said. So the presence is more, and hence good, but the absence is less, missing, incomplete, and therefore bad. To me, the Tiantai Buddhist take presented by Ziporin challenges our everyday consideration of things, presence, and absence like this. So, what are some examples? When strangers see a baby, they wave at him, but not at me. I mean, for instance, I was, taking my baby in the stroller or something. It is precisely the baby's powerlessness, right, that makes him more powerful enough to invite strangers to wave at him. Because of the absence of the power in the baby is more powerful. Once he grows up and gains more different kinds of power, then that power of invitation, of waving, will be lost. So the presence of power makes him more powerless in that sense. That's interesting. When I'm not still hearing a reply from a tax agent, for instance, a day before a deadline of submission, why am I nervous? Because of the absence of her response. It is a sense of the absence that makes me worry about and intensely focus on that matter. Absence makes it something even more present, makes that a big deal. Like this, we are so influenced by not only the presence of something, but also the absence of things as well, in many situations in our everyday life. But once we get to understand this, what seemed to be absent is now understood to be an aspect of its presence. Absence is another mode of how that thing is present. What does that have any practical implication to our everyday life? To me, that's when my father died, but I will talk about that in my next video. Okay, what are your thoughts on this discussion? Please share your stories, thoughts, questions, and so on. I look forward to conversing with you all.